Lulama, thank you so much for joining us. An important time, once again, these 16 days. I mean, ideally, we'd like to have it a 365-day campaign, but it's important, the next 16 days. What would you like to see come out of the campaign?
For the first time in our country, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is our socialization and how we see women, and what is it that we are taught from an early age about the place of women, the role of women that they should be playing, and what are our thoughts and what we think about the LGBTI community, and how do we respond? Do we respond constitutionally as the Constitution binds us to non-sexism, and it also binds us to gender equality?
Well, let's get back to the basics. So we live in a very patriarchal society where toxic masculinity is a real concern in the country. What can we do to try and shift that mindset of generally the men in this country?
So the first thing is patriarchy is in contrary to the Constitution, and therefore it needs to be totally addressed. And I think all men who occupy influential positions, from the home to government positions to the police to the justice system, they need to address the fact that their socialization has always been favoring men and their influence, and that is contrary to gender equality and to addressing non-sexism.
Let's get back to the judiciary. Many people say, well, that's too far down the line. For me, the concern is I feel that many women are too scared to go to a police station and say, this is what's happening to me, this is how I'm being abused, and it needs to be stopped. I mean, what can our judiciary, our South African police service do to try and take women seriously in this country?
First of all, we need to take non-sexism seriously. We need to take the gender discrimination issue seriously. That we don't have a culture of what should women be wearing, what is acceptable. But gender, the social norms, they're the ones that dictate what women should be wearing, how women should be conducting, what should women do with their bodies, which is completely contrary to the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights says we are born equal. So men, first of all, have to come face to face, and this is their role, this 16 days of activism. They have to come face to face with the fact that women are equal to men, and that is how the Constitution and what it means to be born in South Africa. Women are equal to men. They are seen as equal to men, and they must be given an equal status as equal to men, because that's what the Constitution is saying. And therefore, if you find in our equality courts saying people that are questioning how women are practicing their reproductive rights, and subjecting them to so many questions that probably you are raped because you were not a virgin before, you are raped because you were not wearing the right skirt, you are raped because of the space you are in. Those are unconstitutional questions. And it's about time that the cross-examination in our courts, in our equality courts, address the issue of gender and how the social construct plays itself out inside our courts, and it needs to be rooted out.
Let's speak about the courts, because that's often where the sense of fear. I mean, a lot of the women have fear. They don't want to go to court and have to relive terrible experiences that's happened to them, that's happened to their children. We also need to look at the punishment that men that think that they own women's bodies have to be meted out. I mean, we need to look at the judiciary. Are you wanting to see harsher sentences for people found guilty?
Harsher sentences, but most importantly, harsher sentences for police that drop women's cases, for police that ask women, what were you doing before you were raped? What were you doing before you were burned out? What were you doing before you were beaten up by your husband? Why don't you go back to your family? There needs to be a harsh sentence for asking those questions. And then we go to the hospitals. There needs to be a harsher sentence for our health sector if they are not responding positively to the case that is in front of them in terms of what has happened to this woman, what needs to be, what is unlawful. That should be reported. And when they refuse to write and then ask a woman, why were you here? This is why you were bitten. Look at how you look. Those are the things that entrench, this prejudice against women. And I think that in our courts, one of the things that is mostly unacceptable is that our law firms, they have to come to the party here. The law profession has to address itself to how it sees the role of women, how women are addressed. Why should we be asking that question? question. Why should I, when I'm raped, you still ask me, was I a virgin? Was I a good girl before I was raped? Those questions entrench what we call the biasness, and also this issue that we are entrenching to our society, the unconscious hatred towards women. And it's those things that normalize the culture of gender violence in our country. So 16 Days of Activism is a chance that men themselves, because they lead all these influential positions, we have this saying that it's a man's world. Well, men must come to the fore and know that the Constitution is actually contrary to patriarchy and patriarchal norms.
I guess the difficulty is also, in many cultures, is changing that culture. In many cultures, it's the norm that, you know, women are owned by men. That's the way it is, and that's the way it's been done for hundreds and hundreds of years. How difficult is it to change that mindset in often rural cultures that men own women?
So it's not only rural.
Yeah.
It has race to it. It has the socio-economic position of women, the material conditions of women, and it's simply that we should be addressing the systemic issue that makes us how we look at women, how we actually box women's roles, and why do we, as a society, we first of all, just from birth, women are equal, but from birth, we give women these boxes that they should be walking thin on. And if they are found on the other side, where we call it the man's world, there is harsh punishment. And we're calling for that harsh punishment for women who are equal and wanting to be free or to be empowered. Working with the empowerment program and discourse, we need to address the systemic issues. And the invitation, I think, the role of men in this 16 Days of Activism is actually for men to confront their upbringing and also how this upbringing manifests and doubles up in prejudice and harm and causes harm and wreaks havoc to society.
Leads me beautifully into my next question, the boy child, the role of parents in society, showing these kids that this is not the way to behave, or this is the way to behave. How important do parents' roles in bringing these children and changing the psychological, stigma that these are the way that women and children are going to be treated?
So it's important for parents, first of all, to educate themselves about how they are impacted by their own socialization of unequalness. And South African Constitution is saying women and men are born equal. So we must, in our communities, in our family unit, or even in the extended family unit, as we know that South Africa, the family unit is something that can be defined through a gogo, it can be defined through an aunt, it can be defined through mother and father, it can be defined through same-sex families. And one of the major conversations that our families need to have is actually to address the issue of the equal status that is given to every South African, even to the ones that are coming to our country for naturalization. They also need to understand that South African women and that they have been bestowed, just as you get born in South Africa, you are equal. And how then do we start in our families, inside the unit, wherever we find ourselves in that nuclear unit, how do we address the issue of making sure that whatever we do, we turn it around and talk about equality and non-sexism?
Yeah. One of my concerns is we have these hashtag movements, which in large majorities of the world are very impactful. But in South Africa, the reality is people don't have a lot of internet access. They don't understand the concept of hashtag movements. How do we get into communities? You said it's also other than rural communities, but getting into communities and spreading the word there. I guess that's the difficulty, is media can only be used to a certain degree. But you've got to get onto the ground, and you've got to be telling these people that if you treat women in this way, you're going to be dealt with severely, and the women have got to know that they have rights as well. I mean, how do you speak to the people who don't have exposure to social media?
So the contradiction, right, is that already the people are dealt with. So they get life sentences for committing these crimes against women and children. But it still is not entrenched at the base that this thing is unacceptable. The
Exactly.
Constitution just doesn't take this thing lightly. Our courts are not taking this thing lightly. Our police, progressive policing system doesn't take this lightly. And I think one of the things that we need to do, because we have high inequality in the country, there are basic services that have to be equal to our communities, like access to the radio services, because our communities listen to radio, they listen to basic TV stations that do not pay, and those things, they need to be sacrosanct, because we want our people to get as much information as possible, and just also enable people to go into the rural settings, to go into the churches. And I think one of the things that we commend as the Gender Commission is to just see this National Day of Prayer addressing issues of gender violence as well.
What has the Commission got planned for the next 16 days?
What we have got planned is that we are going to be working with all like-minded institutions. We are going to go to these women's hearings on GBV that is done by the Women's Ministry. We are also supporting more women. We are going to go there because we have the power to make sure that the cases that the police have dropped, we as the Chapter 9, we can revisit those cases. We are going to be looking at communities, the cases that the courts have closed, that we are going to use our powers to relook at those cases. We are also going to be taking more complaints from our communities, and we are going
What
to
do you do with those complaints?
What we do with the complaints, we resolve them. We also become, friends of the courts where we need to. We actually talk to the prosecutors when we are not happy about what is happening. We also complain to the law profession about how gender is impacting on how they see the gender violence scourge. We also go to our courts and support the victims and actually encourage the courts to communicate much more with our communities in terms of what is it that is happening. Because if Ugogo is inside the court, has been raped, he doesn't know what is exactly happening inside our courts. The Gender Commission comes in and supports the vulnerable. And I think this year, this 16 days of activism is exactly what we are going to be doing to actually activate more government response towards our people.
Continue the good work, that's all I can say. Thank you so much for coming to chat to us. If you speak to the Minister, maybe she can come and you can ask her if she will come and speak to us, because she's seemingly not speaking to eNCA today, but I know you're doing fantastic work. Thank you so much.